So how does human movement work? Let's jump into the weeds of it. For starters, let's look at the different types of movement. So we either have proximal on distal or distal on proximal. I know that sounds very confusing, but it just means either you have the thing that's close to you moving further away, or the thing that's further from you moving closer to you, or your center. Okay, so let's say for example we were doing some sort of like lat pullover. So weights above our head and we're pulling it over towards our hips. Right, so the distal, the thing that's more far away, i.e. our arms, is coming closer to the proximal, which is more like our core, right? And on the other hand, what if we had somebody just posted up on a horizontal bar and then they sort of pushed themselves up into a handstand? A, crazy strong move. B, that's now proximal on distal. Your distal, so your arms, have stayed still and your body's moved over it. Okay, so why is that an important distinction? And I think it is because there's something strange about those different kinds of movement, even if it's almost an exact mimicry of each other. So, for example, something that Kelly Starrett talks about, so a great physiotherapist, is that you shouldn't just do overhead press, you should do handstand push-ups. And that's something that I remember hearing and not really understanding why. Like, as far as I could tell, that was the same movement, just inverted. And I guess it doesn't explain it fully, but it kind of gets at it, that there's something different in the movement of distal on proximal and proximal on distal. There's something different about pushing your whole body over your arms versus pushing your arms over your body. Why is that exactly? I'm not sure, but it just seems that there's a different way of the body functioning like this. Okay, so we're doing all these movements. What's actually happening at the joint? So let's talk about like the shoulder, for example. We're talking about going overhead. So what we can see happening is sort of two things simultaneously for the most part. There's going to be a little bit of smaller movements, but these are the main ones. So we're going to get a roll and a glide. So for example, say I've lifted my arm overhead. In the ball and socket joint of my shoulder, the head of my humerus, so my arm bone, is going to roll backwards. Now as this happens, it's not going to exclusively roll and stay perfectly still around one axis. It's actually going to glide or slide so that it doesn't impinge on the other bony structures. Like, it has to sort of get out of the way. Now, I hinted at some smaller movements. So these are called accessory movements or joint play. This is basically, it's called translation. So it just means like a horizontal movement of some nature that will happen passively or just with like little movements. So you could just be going about your everyday life and there's this tiny bit of joint play occurring in the joint. But it's sort of like a subtle lack of stability. Now you can imagine that a lack of stability is a big problem when we're looking at moving big weights. And interestingly, it seems that there's to some extent like a built-in way around this, which is that if we take a joint to end range, so typically where we'd kind of imagine it was less stable, that's actually, generally speaking, taking the slack out of the joint because you put everything on stretch. It's taut, right? And now it's in what's called a closed pack position. So everything, again, is tight. So there's less, if not no, joint play occurring. And the reason for this is basically all of that tension has sort of jammed the articular surfaces. So in the shoulder, like the glenoid fossa, so the joint, the actual caved in part of your shoulder that the humerus locks into. That and the humerus are more jammed in, sort of compressed from all that tension, so it's more stable. The other thing that I thought was very interesting to look at around how movement functions is how opposite sides of something on your body can impact another. So if we look at, say, like the bicep and the tricep, so if I was to bring my hand towards my shoulder, obviously that's going to use my bicep, it's a elbow flexor, but what's also happening is there's a relationship between those two muscles, so that as I'm sort of activating my bicep, I'm putting the tricep on more of like a passive tension and giving it like a potential elastic energy, right? So that once it goes back the other way, it's going to have more ability to do so. And I think we can sort of see this naturally all the time. Like, if somebody goes to throw, they don't just push forward, they pull back to throw. That's what creates the snap, the elasticity, and the actual ability to generate force. Now, for those of you who don't know, I've been covering all of this and more as a part of my 50 Days to Rebuild challenge. where I read 50 pages of a physio/exercise book and do 50 minutes of exercise in a day. So we started reading Newman's Kinesiology, which is where all of this is from. I did also finish the previous book on clinical anatomy, but frankly it wasn't too applicable to these videos and a little boring if I'm honest. But moving on to the exercise portion of things. So looking at the exercise portion of things, I actually did some pretty cool mobilizations. So I've been having some elbow pain, so I tried to do this banded joint sort of stretch for it. So I wrapped a Rogue Monster band around my elbow and tried to pull into flexion whilst it was pulling down. And oh my, that actually felt crazy, like kind of crazy painful, but good too. It sort of feels like it's gapping the joint, like when you put something behind your knee and try and like compress down on it. Similar to that, but actually kind of better. So that felt really cool. After doing this mobilization for my elbow, I tried to do a bicep curl and instantly had way better range of motion. So it was something that I almost didn't really know like I lacked range of motion in until I really had to push it, and I was like, oh, like my elbows are tight. That's kind of crazy. But yeah, it helped, so that's really awesome. And the other thing I did was for my wrist. So one thing that I often do, almost subconsciously, is sort of crack my wrist, but just by like squeezing at the base of it. And sort of compressing everything in that area. What I notice when I do this, it often sort of pulls my wrist laterally. It gets a nice crack, it feels a little better. So I thought I might try and mobilize in this way. So I had a band wrapped around my wrist. Now the band's pulling medially, but I'm pronated and the anatomical position is supination, so it's essentially a lateral pull. It's just opposites, don't worry too much about it. But that and trying to sort of just move over my wrist while doing that did actually feel really good. It felt like it really got some, I don't know, some better feeling in my wrist. And of course I did the McGill Big 3. All of this went pretty well except for the bird dog, which has sort of been the theme as of late, unfortunately. But that happens. Hopefully I will figure out what to do with the bird dog. But yeah, that is about it for day 39. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.